This podcast is brought to you by Spotify for podcasters. Have you yourself ever wanted to become a podcaster? Well, Spotify makes it simple and easy to do so. You can record, edit, and even distribute your podcast straight from their app. The best part? It is absolutely 100% free. Visit their website, podcasters.spotify.com, for more details, and download the app on your Apple or Android devices today to get started on your podcasting adventure. That's Spotify for podcasters. What is going on, everybody? Travis Fowler, Harkwriter, back again this week with a new edition of the Four Corner Podcast. So you know what that means. It's time to talk pro wrestling. And this past week, we had to say goodbye to somebody who was a very integral part to my childhood and honestly a big integral part to my overall fandom for professional wrestling. The icon, the legend, no matter how you want to describe him, he is definitely a legend in everybody's eyes, and if he isn't, well, he should be, and that is Sting. Sting has been, as I expressed last week, my all-time favorite. That's never going to change, and finally, after nearly 40 years in professional wrestling, Sting has retired, and he had a dang near perfect send-off at AEW's Revolution pay-per-view. He was the main event. It was a tornado tag match. Something that surprised me was that they actually had him win and defeat the Young Bucks. Did not expect that whatsoever, but overall, I didn't have an issue with the match. Now, some people, especially some that I'm close with, that I got to discuss a little bit of the match with, had an issue with it because they felt like at one point Darby Allin was kind of trying to take more of the spotlight away from Sting and the focus on his retirement. To which I counteracted his argument with, well, they didn't do anything in that match that Sting didn't already approve of ahead of time. If this is his final match, you know that he had a say in any and everything that went on in it. And I am saying with 100% confidence that the match went probably better than what he expected. As he even said in his own words, he expected this to be an emotional thing for everybody watching, but he did not expect it to be as emotional for himself. And I couldn't be more happy for the man that he got to have the career that he did, and he got to go out on his own terms, which is something that nobody expected, myself included, after the 2015 Seth Rollins match back at Night of Champions, where it looked like he was just on the brink of paralysis and still finished the match. But as we saw at the Hall of Fame ceremony for WWE in 2016, an event that I was actually at and got to witness firsthand, Sting announced his retirement from professional wrestling on that night. Luckily for us, though, he came back to AEW for what I saw one person refer to it as his Logan run, and I think that's a very apropos description because he was undefeated. He was a warrior who went out on his shield, and again, all the best wishes and happy retirement to the icon, the legend, the man, my favorite of all time, Sting. Thank you very much for all the memories you gave me, and I cannot express my gratitude enough for you being a big part of my fandom of professional wrestling. Now, aside from Sting, the overall AEW Revolution pay-per-view actually got rave reviews from a lot of fans, stating that it was probably one of the best pay-per-views in professional wrestling for at least the last 5 years. Myself, I didn't necessarily see it that way. Granted, I also went into it thinking that for myself it was a one-match show. There wasn't really a whole lot of appeal for the rest of the card. That's not to say that there weren't matches that I wasn't thinking could live up to their hype or wouldn't be fun to watch. For instance, the triple threat main event or the three-way dance, whatever they want to call it, for the AEW World title. I almost thought that they were going to let Swerve get this one, but Samoa Joe pulling out the win and retaining the title just goes to show that I believe they've got a long-term plan set for Samoa Joe and his title reign. I won't say it's going to be similar to anything that MJF did, but I do believe they plan on giving Joe a monster run with the title, and I still firmly believe that if anybody is going to defeat Joe and become champion, it needs to be Swerve Strickland. So he's the one that's the hottest at the moment in AEW, and I think anybody else would be a missed opportunity for Swerve if you didn't capitalize while it was white hot good for your company. Speaking of AEW overall, while there's been reports that backstage morale is once again at a low due to what has been referred to as a frantic type of booking situation, very similar to what WWE used to go through during the McMahon era of having scripts changed last minute or not even knowing what you were going to do until day of, sometimes up until the show starts or even during the show. That's been the rumors that have made the mills. I have heard from a couple people something similar that have had an opportunity to work with AEW over the last month or so. But that doesn't mean that everybody is in the same boat, nor does that mean that everybody has a bad morale towards the company. We saw this past week on Dynamite, they released their new look for AEW Dynamite, and overall for AEW, I have to say I appreciate them getting rid of the boxed format of their logo where it showed All Elite at the top, wrestling at the bottom with the brackets basically coinciding everything. I'm very glad that they've now dropped that and it's just straight up AEW for their logo. They've done it for Dynamite, they've done it for Collision. I'm sure Rampage is not that far behind from getting the same treatment. I think it's a better move for AEW because if you look at a lot of other companies, maybe outside of New and All Japan Pro Wrestling, I don't really see a whole lot of companies that have their full name displayed as part of their logo unless it's in small print, usually near the bottom. But a lot of companies just go for their 3 letters usually, or 4 letters. I don't think I've seen 5 letters yet, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Overall, though, I think AEW is doing really well. I actually can appreciate AEW for what it is. As I've expressed numerous times on this show, WWE is just my variety of wrestling that I prefer over just about anybody else. And that is nothing or offense to anybody else. It's just simply what I prefer. I like more story with my wrestling because to me, that's what professional wrestling is. It's story with physical activities added to it. Whereas if you look at AEW, as we've said before, they've adopted more of that New Japan-esque style of just putting together matches and figuring out the story as it goes along, or maybe there's not even really a story to go off of. It's just 2 guys wrestling each other to see who's the better person. And honestly, I don't necessarily have a problem with that either because it does create dream match scenarios, dream matches like the one that we have had formally announced that will take place at the new AEW Dynasty pay-per-view. This is a match that many have called for over the last couple of years, ever since we saw his debut in AEW, and we knew the working relationship with New Japan was already there, so I think a lot of people expected this to take place. But now we can actually say we don't have to worry about there being a New Japan conduit. It is just straight up 2 AEW guys. At AEW's Dynasty event in St. Louis, it has been made official. Bryan Danielson will take on Will Ospreay, and I think that match is going to be a show stealer. No ifs, no ands, no buts about it. Bryan Danielson has just been on a tear of having amazingly sick matches since he went to AEW. There's not a whole lot of blemishes or even a lot of what I would call disinterest in any of his matches. A lot of people, you either are for it or maybe that's just not the one for you. But nevertheless, Bryan Danielson has been doing some of his best wrestling work on what he calls his final full run as an in-ring full-time competitor. And this match with Will Ospreay is going to be an amazing mark on that legacy. As you've heard me talk about on this show, I do firmly believe, and now I don't have an issue talking about spoilers, since it's been some time since the event has occurred. I do believe fully we are going to get Bryan Danielson versus Zack Sabre Jr. 3, since both men have a win apiece. I don't see that happening anywhere except maybe two places, and I only say two because I would say you might want to do one just for the sheer numbers that would come with it. I've said I believe it'll take place at this year's Forbidden Door, which has been announced to be held at Arthur Ashe Stadium this year. I think that's a great location for it too. Or they'll save it for the Wembley show in August. I think either one of those two are going to be where you'll see that rubber match between Sabre Jr. and Danielson. But I want to take a second to actually appreciate AEW as a whole, because I know I haven't really talked much about AEW over the last few weeks because WWE has been the focal point on a lot of the professional wrestling world. And I do think AEW is doing quite well for themselves right now. You know, as I've said, and I already said it once in this episode here, I've said it in previous episodes, while they're not my be-all, end-all, and my preferred form of professional wrestling entertainment, they are still very entertaining. The matches that you can get out of it, while I may not agree with some of them, and as somebody who now has had a little bit of experience on the in-ring side of things, I legitimately don't really appreciate some of the things that go on in-ring wise with AEW. Does that mean that it's wrong? No, it just means it's not my preferred method. And I think right now they are in a bit of a stride. They've signed a number of top name talents for free agency. I saw a meme that actually came across my timeline earlier this week, and it's 100% true. All four of the people that competed in the main event and co-main events for New Japan's Wrestle Kingdom last year are now all full-time participants on the AEW roster. We're talking about Okada, we're talking about Ospreay, we're talking about Omega, Jay White. All four of them are under the AEW banner now. And that's crazy to think that we didn't have this last year. Was there that working relationship? Yeah, clearly. But to have them now all on a stateside brand, that is amazing. And nobody can take away the accomplishment that AEW has over these last 5 years. They're still a brand new company, essentially. And whether you agree with them or not, whether you like or dislike some of the backstage antics that you've heard about, whether it be from one person or the overall morale of the locker room, AEW is a success. From having a national TV deal to then going in and having 3 different shows with that deal, to going out on the road, selling out Wembley Stadium with over 80,000 people last year, and the agency, the free agency being swept by them on a lot of big names, one of which we expect to also debut next week after we had Kazuchika Okada show up this last week. We know that AEW has just been on a roll, and I do believe, as most people do as well, we're going to see the debut of Mercedes Moné. As much as I would wish that she would go back to WWE, because I feel like you could throw her into that Bayley storyline against Damage Control seamlessly, put Trinity in there too, and you have a story that makes sense to also set up a women's tag title match for WrestleMania. That's just my own personal opinion, but I think we know where this is all going to end up going. And them picking up Mercedes Moné is a big coup for them. Do I think it's going to make much of a difference when it comes to like their ratings and attendance that they seemingly have some struggles with? No, I don't. But overall, as a fan, I'll just be happy because I still love great wrestling. And that's one thing that I really want people, especially in the IWC, to understand that tribalism is the death of professional wrestling. If you wish for a company to do bad or worse, to go out of business, just simply because you don't like them, then you're not really a fan. You want all these companies to succeed, because as I've said on this show, and as the old saying goes, a high tide raises all ships. So at this point, if you're rooting for WWE and against AEW, or vice versa, or if you're rooting for any company over any other competition, I don't consider you a true wrestling fan. And if that is your methodology of how you like to deal with things, or at least that's how you want to be a fan of professional wrestling, then I think you're missing out on a lot of other great professional wrestling, whether it's on TV or on the independent level, because local indie shows are amazing and they provide a lot of the future talent that you see on our screens from a week to week basis. I'm fortunate enough to work for one of them and got to call one of the best matches I have seen in my tenure as a commentator. It was unbelievable, and I got all that from independent wrestling. So please continue to support WWE, support AEW, support New Japan, MLW, TNA, support it all, indie wrestling as well, because it just makes the business as a whole that much better. And speaking of Mercedes Moné, real quick before we move into some TNA talk, there was a video that came out this week where she verbally stated that she believes she will be back in WWE one day. Is that day right now? No, doesn't look to be so. We all pretty much know what the big business name is hinting towards, as well as the graphic that showed Boston spelled with two S's. And I think we all can figure out what's going to happen this week on Dynamite. But I do look forward to the day she does return to WWE, because I think at this point in her career, she can have some excellent matches with almost anybody on that roster. We already know she has great chemistry with Bianca Belair and Charlotte Flair. Can you imagine the stories she could tell with Rhea Ripley, or even my personal new favorite in the women's division, Tiffany Stratton? There is so much story that can be told, and excellent matches can be had on the WWE roster when she eventually goes back. I would rather hope sooner than later, but I'm just going to enjoy seeing Mercedes Moné back on my television screens on a regular basis again. Now, past AEW, TNA had their Sacrifice event, which, by all accounts that I have read, was a pretty good show from start to finish. And there was a tidbit of information that I found very interesting and disheartening. And it does harken back to a WWE situation several years ago. And every once in a while you hear some stories about it still today, where they were confiscating signs from fans. And much like the whole Maxine controversy that took place last week, my thought is, as long as your sign isn't vulgar in any sort of way, you should be allowed to bring just about any sign to a wrestling event. Obviously, people know what I mean by vulgarity, whether it refers to an act or a person or something of a name call that's inappropriate. People know what I mean by that. But you should be allowed to boo and cheer whoever it is that you want. You should be allowed to bring a sign for just about anything, again, within the context of taste. And apparently at the Sacrifice event, there was a pretty heavy signs for Scott D'Amore that were confiscated by TNA management's arena executives or supporters or whatever you want to call them. So much so to the point that once fans got their signs confiscated, someone actually had paper with a marker writing "We want Scott" on those papers and passing them out to fans. So this whole Scott D'Amore situation is still very much on the forethought of professional wrestling fans' minds, especially if you're a TNA fan. I myself have actually been a little disheartened by the whole thing, because I felt TNA was on such a good run that you taking the guy who helped bring it back to that level of prominence and you just throw him aside for no other reason that has been reported up to this point, except that there was a difference of opinion on how management should go with TNA, upper management, that is, Anthem being specific with that. And the rumor was that he offered to buy TNA, but because they refused, that was another reason they let him go. Even if that is a case that they refused his offer, that's not any reason to let someone go. And I really do think what has been reported is that it came down to basically a disagreement amongst how the company should be used moving forward. I think that's closer to the truth than just about anything else that's out there right now. I really hope that eventually something can be done to where he can end up back in TNA, because I feel like his presence really helped get that show back to that notoriety that we mentioned. And I, too, have just been bummed out that he's been gone. I still try to watch the show regularly each week because I enjoy a lot of the participants that are on that roster. But yeah, ever since the Scott D'Amore situation has occurred, it's been a little difficult for me to tune in to TNA with the same zeal that I had at the beginning of 2024. But hopefully things will change for TNA. It seems like they're still doing good. They signed Alex Hammerstone this past week, which was great news for Hammerstone. I couldn't be more happy that he got picked up by TNA and put on apparently another banger with Josh Alexander at Sacrifice, which I think that story's not over just yet. I do know a little something that happened on that, which is why I make the claim that I do. So I still hope the best for TNA, and I hope everything works out in the end for nothing but long-term success for Total Nonstop Action Wrestling. Now, as I stated before, we've been very WWE heavy over the last few weeks because with WrestleMania only about 4 weeks away now, things are really heating up and getting more interesting each and every week. The card is starting to shape up very nicely, and some people, they would go the route of saying that this is looking like one of the best, if not the best, WrestleMania and biggest WrestleMania card to date. Do I think it necessarily has that appeal? Maybe not exactly, but that depends on how you look at it. If you look at it from the standpoint of they don't have, quote, a lot of big names, that again goes to what do you consider a big name? Are you looking at strictly a Legends name like Undertaker or Shawn Michaels, or as we know, we've got The Rock? If you're looking at it from that standpoint, then no, WrestleMania is not a huge show this year. But if you look at it from the point that they are utilizing a lot of their talent that they have nurtured and have grown to become prominent figures, yeah, it is very heavy on that. And it reminds me a lot of what WrestleMania X7 was like. That's still the best WrestleMania to date. And if you look at that card from top to bottom, there are legendary names by this standard today. There is a plethora of legends on that card. But back then, they were still either main eventers to mid-carders to some that were just certain acts that you knew were going to generate a reaction from audience. But everybody felt important on that show. And I feel like that's the way this WrestleMania is shaping up, where everybody feels important. Every match feels like an important match to care about. You know, we've got the now confirmed main event tag match for night one with Cody and Seth teaming up to face Roman and Rock, which had a great closing segment for SmackDown this week. By the way, that new entrance from The Rock with the Tron and the lightning bolts and the final one hitting with him standing in the middle, perfect. I think it's absolutely amazing. Saw a video on X where somebody was like, let's throw the Hollywood theme Rock with this video and see how it fits. Seamlessly like a glove. I retweeted it, and I will put the same quote out on this video that I did on that video, which is, Rock, here's the assignment. Get that back as part of your gimmick now, and man, that entrance is going to be rock solid, pun very much intended. Overall, that segment did great to keep the intrigue alive for the whole feud. Cody slapping Rock to leave us with the cliffhanger that they did to close the show was absolute perfection. I do think this is a big money match. And it all has implications. There's stakes with it. If Cody and Seth's team wins night one, then we have straight up Roman Reigns versus Cody Rhodes on WrestleMania Sunday. And if they lose, then it's bloodline rules and anything goes. And honestly, it's hard to tell which route they're going to end up going, because you can make an argument for either side of that story still being a very important factor into the main event of Mania. Like, neither one is like more glaring as the route they're going to go than the other, which is amazing. And that's what I love so much about what we're going through right now. But it's not even just this. The rest of the card looks amazing as well. Seth Rollins defending the World Heavyweight title against Drew McIntyre is doing absolutely awesome as a story. I very much still hope that they will consider putting CM Punk as a special referee, because I think it adds just that little extra into that match where it makes you even more intrigued to see it. Rhea Ripley versus Becky Lynch, if they keep it as a straight up one-on-one, is still intriguing. I feel like we're going to get a Liv Morgan addition into that. I know at this point we're going to be looking at a triple threat match for the US title, at least a triple threat, some kind of multi-man for that. I'm still going to bet that we're going to see Randy Orton, Kevin Owens, and Logan Paul in that triple threat style, just because it also doesn't put as much pressure on Orton to perform at the one-on-one level since he's returned from his back injury. You can tell that they've been very protective of Orton, and rightfully so, but I can see where that's going to end up being a route to take for the U.S. title. And then on the Intercontinental title side, we're going to find out tonight on Raw. As I'm recording this is on Sunday, but it's being released Monday. And oh man, it really is up in the air who I want to be the man that faces Gunther for the Intercontinental title. I said it last week, and I still am going to stand by it. I think there's only two guys that I'm interested to seeing take on Gunther, and they're both in this gauntlet match to determine who faces Gunther at WrestleMania. Sami Zayn, Chad Gable. It's one of those two. And either way, you're going to get a great match out of it. Like, I look forward to that match. I really do think we're going to see an announcement about the tag team title situation, and I mean splitting them up, potentially at Mania as well. The women's title match, the WWE women's title match to be specific, I want to spend a little bit of time on, because I've seen people say that they feel like that should main event WrestleMania Night 1. And it's simply because Bayley won the Women's Royal Rumble, and in turn, who wins the Royal Rumble main events WrestleMania. And normally I understand and agree with that argument. However, Bayley and Damage Control's story, while it's good, it's not WrestleMania main event worthy. I'm sorry, it's the same argument that I made last year when people were crying for Charlotte Flair and Rhea Ripley to main event Night 1. I agreed that the match was going to be great, and it was, but it wasn't a better story than Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens against the Usos as part of the Bloodline saga. Anybody who thinks that that's not true, you really don't understand how important the Bloodline story has been, nor do you appreciate it. Because I'm sorry, it does rank above just about any other story you can think of. Outside of Cody Rhodes' finishing the story, which this is where the Bloodline and finishing the story intersect, there is no other better story. There just isn't. Everything else is below them. And I do think Bayley and Io Sky are going to be put in a prominent position. I could see it being the co-main event, much like Flair and Ripley was last year on Night 1. I can easily see that for Night 1 this year, and I do think the story is still worthy of it. So while it may not be main event material, it is still an important match that we should keep our eyes on. And I do think there's more matches to come that are going to be very intriguing. WrestleMania is just right around the corner, and I could not be more excited. I'm just excited overall. Professional wrestling is cool again, and I cannot be more ecstatic to say that. It has been a long time since wrestling has been this much fun, and I, for one, am very happy to be around to witness it. Guys, that's what I got for you this week. What are you looking forward to at WrestleMania? And what do you think of AEW so far this year? Do you think they're doing great? What do you think could be improved on with them? And what do you think can be improved on with WWE? Maybe even the WrestleMania card itself? Sound off on those comments down below. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to this channel, like and share this podcast video. Remember, we are on Facebook, Instagram, and X. You can follow me personally over on X at Travis_4CP, and I'll be back again next week with another 4CP edition. But until that time, as always, have a great week ahead. God bless you, and continue to love pro wrestling.